So let's start out here with problem A. In problem A, we have an x squared minus a 12x plus 11. So we need to start by finding out what our A, B, and C are. Well, our B is negative 12, our C is positive 11, our A is not there, so it's a hidden 1. So AC method says first I need to look at what A times C is, which means what is 1 times 11, which will give us 11. And then we need 2 factors of 11, be careful, that are going to add up to our B, which is negative 12. Well, the only way to get 2 factors to give me positive 11 when I multiply them, but add up to a negative 12 when I add them up is if both of them are negative. So what we'll do that is a negative 1 and a negative 11. Negative 1 times negative 11 will give us a positive 11, but the negative 1 plus negative 11 will also give us a negative 12. That's what we wanted. So what does this do again? This lets us know how to break down that middle term, the negative 12x. It tells us that we can break it up into 2 pieces. One that's going to have a negative 1 and one that's going to have a negative 11. Because those were the 2 pieces we came up with, was a negative 1 and a negative 11. Now notice, they need to be like terms, so they both need to have the x's like the original term, so they're both going to have an x. And then remember, your first and last term, your x squared and your 11 should stay the same. So your positive 11 at the end should stay the same, and your positive x squared at the beginning should stay the same. Now that I've got 4 terms, though, I can just move this into a grouping problem. Grouping the first 2 and the last 2. Notice, what do the first 2 have in common? They only have an x in common. So I can pull out an x from each piece. If I pull out an x from the first piece, I'll still have an x left. If I pull out an x from the second piece, I still have the negative 1 that was in front of it. Now let's look at the second pair. Notice the second pair, if I treat that as its own problem, has a negative sign out in front of the first term. So my GCF is going to have a negative on it. What else do they both have in common? Well, they both have that they're divisible by 11. So I can actually pull out a negative 11 from both. And then its leftovers will go inside of a set of parentheses here. So pulling out the negative and the 11 from the first term would only leave me with an x. However, dividing a negative 11 into my positive 11 for my second term will switch that positive back to being another negative. 11 will go to 11 one time. How you know you didn't make a mistake, though, is that these 2 pieces match, the matching x minus 1s with parentheses. So that's my new common factor that I can pull out is my x minus 1, which leaves me with leftovers that will go inside of a parentheses is an x minus 11. And that's my final answer. X minus 1 times x minus 11. And depending on how you wrote it up, you might have gotten the x minus 11 first and the x minus 1 second. That's okay. That's the same exact answer. In B, we have x squared minus 10x plus 25. So again, we're looking for A, B, and C. Again, we don't see an A, so it's a hidden 1. Our B is a negative 10, and our C is a positive 25. So with AC method, when we have 3 terms, we're always using AC method. So our A is a 1 times our C is a positive 25. So 1 times 25 is 25. And then what we're going to be looking for are 2 factors of 25 that add up to our B are negative 10. Well, what 2 factors of positive 25 add up to a negative 10? Well, that's going to be a negative 5 times another negative 5. A negative times a negative does give us a positive 25, but a negative 5 plus a negative 5 does give me a negative 10. So now what do I do with this? Remember, I did this so that I can split up this middle piece. That negative 10x is going to break up into 2 pieces. It's going to break up into 2 pieces, each with a negative 5 is what I came up with. Now, because the original piece had an x, when I split it up, they both need x's as well so that they stay like terms. And then I can carry down my first term and my last term, those won't change. So my x squared won't change and my 25 won't change. Then I can just do my grouping because I'm up to 4 terms now. Once you hit your 4 terms, you can just do grouping. So what do the first 2 have in common? Well, they both have an x. So if I factor out an x from both pieces, I'll still have an x and I'll still have a minus 5 in my second piece. Notice in my second 2, though, my first term is negative, so I need to pull out a negative. We have a 5 and a 25, so they're both divisible by 5. And the leftovers will go inside of their parentheses. So I'm pulling out a negative 5. That will turn this first term into just an x. However, dividing out a negative 5 from a positive 25 will turn that back into a negative 5 as well. But we know we're doing everything right at that point because we do have a matching x minus 5. So you can factor out the matching x minus 5s that have parentheses around them. And then the leftovers will go inside of their own set of parentheses. What will be left over is the other x minus 5. And you can leave this like this, an x minus 5 times an x minus 5, or you can streamline it another way. If you've got an x minus 5 by itself twice, it means you've got 2 of them. So I've got x minus 5 squared. Either way, it means the same thing. Let's try problem C. In problem C, we've got an x squared minus x minus 30. Again, our A, we don't see it yet, so it's a hidden 1. We don't really see our B either, so it's a hidden 1 too, but the minus sign means it's a negative 1. And our C is a negative 30, so when we go to do our A times C, it's still 1 times, be careful, C is negative 30. So that'll give us a negative 30, and we need 2 factors of negative 30 that are going to add up to a negative 1. Well, remember, if you need 2 factors to multiply together to give you a negative, the only way to do that is if one's positive and one's negative. Well, I also need them to add up to a negative 1. So if one's positive and one's negative, well, I need 2 side-by-side numbers that will add up to a 1. Well, that'll be 6 and 5. Which one needs to be negative, though, is the 6, the bigger one, because I want them to add up to a negative 1. So negative 6 times 5 does give me the negative 30, but negative 6 plus 5 does give me the negative 1 as well. So that'll work out perfect. So now I need to take that, that negative 6 and 5 and break down that negative 1x using that. So that'll break down my negative 1x into a negative 6x and a positive 5x. Doesn't matter which order you put those in. If you accidentally put it in a different order, you'll get the same answer just in the reverse order of whatever I'm gonna get. And then I can leave my first term alone, my x squared. And I can leave my second term, or my last term alone, my negative 30. And again, it seems anti-intuitive that getting more pieces would help you, but now you've got 4 terms, so you can just do grouping. So grouping the first 2, what do the first 2 have in common? They have a common factor of x. So if you pull an x out of each piece, you'll be left with an x minus 6. What do the second two have in common? Well, we've got a 5 and a 30, so they're both divisible by 5. And we had a plus out in front, so we'll carry down the plus. So factoring out the 5 from both pieces will still leave me with an x and a minus 6. Notice, I did this right because we've got our matching common factor of x minus 6 with parentheses around it. So we can pull out our x minus 6 that's matching from both pieces, and it will leave us with a new set of leftovers inside of our parentheses. It will leave us with x plus 5. So that's going to be our final answer, is an x minus 6 and an x plus 5. And you might have gotten the x plus 5 first and then the x minus 6 second. That's absolutely fine. It's the same exact answer. Let's take a look at problem D. In problem D, we are in descending order. It might look like we're not, but we are. We start with 2 x's, 1 x, then look at the last piece has no x's. So we are set up correctly. So we are going to start out with our x squared plus 6xy plus 8y squared. So our a will be whatever's in front of the x squared, which is a hidden 1. Our b will be the positive 6, and the c will be the positive 8. So we've got 3 terms, so we're doing our AC method. So a times c is going to be 1 times 8, which is 8. Then we'll need 2 factors of 8 that add up to the middle piece, the b, the positive 6. Well, the 2 factors of 8 that do add up to a positive 6 are 4 and 2. So we need to break down our middle piece, that's 6xy, into 2 pieces, one with a 4 and one with a 2. So that means our 6xy will break down into, we said, a positive 4 and a positive 2. Well, they need to stay like terms, so they both need the x and y that we started out with. So we've got a 4xy and a 2xy. That's all. The variables don't change, we're just splitting up the pieces. So the first term, the x squared, and the last term, the 8y squared, are going to stay the same, just like before. Except for now I've got 4 terms, so I can do my grouping again. So grouping the first 2, what do they have in common? They both have an x. So pulling an x out of the first piece means I'll still have an x in the first piece. Plus, pulling out an x from the second piece means I'll still have a 4 and a y. Looking at the last 2, let's pull down the plus sign first. They are both divisible by 2 and both have a y. So pulling out a 2 and a y means I will have just an x as my first piece. Plus, pulling out the 2 from the 8 will leave me with a 4. Pulling out one of the y's still leaves me with a y. Let's see if I'm matching to make sure that I did this right. I've got an x plus 4y and an x plus 4y. They do match. Because they match, I can pull it out. X plus 4y is the new common factor. What will be left over in its own set of parentheses? Well, my leftovers will be the x plus 2y. So that is going to be my final answer. X plus 4y times x plus 2y.